Hello Paul Harvey fans, Brad Dison here. Toys are important to the development of a child's brain. Through toys, children learn how to use their imaginations and solve problems. When I first shared this episode of Paul Harvey's The Rest of the Story, I had numerous comments with questions about it. Stick around after the rest of the story to hear the rest of the story. We'll take a closer look at the toy mentioned in this episode. Also, I'd like to thank Chris Murphy for fixing the audio on this episode. Here's Paul Harvey.
The rest of the story. It was while on a business trip that Milton saw the tiny toy helicopter in the shop window. The paper tag on which the price was hand-inscribed said 50 cents, but there was something about that clever little plaything that made it especially worthwhile. It could fly, or at least so Milton surmised, noticing the attachment of rubber bands to its uncomplicated mechanism. Milton walked inside the shop. 50 cents for the little helicopter, he said to the clerk. Well, yes, the clerk answered, but you understand that it's a kit. It has to be put together. Oh, that was particularly delightful, Milton exclaimed, and then he explained. He'd once been a school teacher, and from this experience he had retained some very specific ideas about education. The real challenge, he happily expounded, is winning a pupil's interest. Once he is fascinated with something, it would be impossible to prevent him from learning about it. I take it you have children of your own, said the clerk. Oh, yes, Milton answered, grammar school age. He and his wife had encouraged them to read and ask questions and to think for themselves from the time they were quite small, and they'd like nothing better than to build a little helicopter and watch it fly. Milton had always believed in the power of educational toys to stimulate intellect, and this particular one was among the best that he had ever seen. And which model would you like, the clerk asked. What were his choices, Milton wanted to know. Oh, my goodness, answered the clerk. There's one that rises to a height of 50 feet or so and then falls without harming itself. There's one that shoots upward about as high but then glides gently back to earth. There's one that ascends 25 feet and hovers in midair for as long as half a minute. Well, Milton purchased the model that seemed most intriguing, and he hurried home to Cedar Rapids, Iowa that afternoon, thoroughly pleased with himself for having discovered such a gift, and he was quite eager to present it. What did you bring us, Daddy? That was the familiar greeting at the door. What did you bring us, Daddy? And from behind his back, Milton, grinning broadly, produced this neatly wrapped toy. Well, the boys tore off the wrapping like frenzied predators. Do you like it? Milton asked hopefully. My, how they liked it. Well, after carefully assembling the little helicopter, they wound up its rubber band motor again, and again, and again, indoors that night, watching it rise and bob against the ceiling, outdoors the next morning, cheering as it soared to dizzying heights, as high as a tree, and then sailed back to them in lazy circles. Milton, convinced as he was of his educational theories, could never have imagined how correct he had been this once. For you see, his two youngest sons were then ages 11 and 7, and they would remember all of the rest of their days that one day in the autumn of 1878, when their father brought them a little helicopter toy, a 50-cent plaything, ostensibly, and yet a plaything which was to awaken in them a passion that changed their lives forever after, and our lives as well. You'd never met the educator-turned-minister who, returning from a trip on church business, bestowed a tiny yet enormous gift to his boys, just an interested father named Milton Wright. All of your life you've known his sons Wilbur and Orville. Only now you know the rest of the story.
When I first published this Paul Harvey broadcast, I had a whole host of comments from people who claimed that this story could not be possible for several reasons. I received comments that rubber bands hadn't been invented at the time this toy was supposed to have been produced, 1878. Well, Stephen Perry, a British inventor and businessman who owned the Messrs. Perry & Co. rubber manufacturers of London, made products from vulcanized rubber. On March 17, 1845, he received British patent number 13880 for the rubber band. I received comments that the helicopter was invented in the mid-20th century, so a toy of this type could not have existed in the 1800s. The earliest recorded mention of vertical flight by a machine came from China over 2,400 years ago. Chinese children have played with toys which could produce vertical flight since around 400 BC. In the 1480s, Leonardo da Vinci designed and built models of a machine that is now referred to as his aerial screw. Here's a picture of it on your screen. French inventor Gustave Domcourt, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, coined the term helicopter in 1861. In 1878, Enrico Forlanini's steam-powered unmanned helicopter flew to a height of 39 feet. I searched and found numerous newspaper articles about helicopters from as far back as the 1880s. At that time, however, no one had ever flown in one. Only toys and unmanned models existed. In 1889, the Evening World published an article entitled "The Conquest of the Air," written by fiction writer Jules Verne, in which he described the different forms of attempts at flight made by inventors. The list included, and this is a quote, "helicopters, machines propelled by screws on vertical axles." The other two forms were orthopters, which reproduced the natural flight of birds, and aeroplanes, A-E-R-O planes, propelled by screws on horizontal axles. One of the earliest articles I found described a helicopter's ability at vertical takeoff. The Centralia Enterprise and Tribune from May 24, 1890 reported that, this is another quote, "A helicopter can land on the roof of a house. Looks like Santa Claus soon won't be needing that old sleigh any longer." In 1909, two inventors, Emil Berliner and J.N. Williams, were, this is a quote, "experimenting with a helicopter near Washington, which is the type of flying machine favored by Thomas Edison." The oldest article I found, which reported that the Wright brothers were inspired by a mechanical flying toy given to them by their father, was from May 30th, 1912. On the following day, the Hutchinson Gazette reported that the Wright brothers began their experiments in flying when they were mere boys. Their stepfather gave them a helicopter as a toy. The curious little instrument, when wound up, flew about the room over the heads of the delighted youngsters. Mr. Harvey said that Milton paid 50 cents for the toy, which would have been a lot of money in 1878. Mr. Harvey also points out that there was something clever about the plaything that made it especially worthwhile. It could fly. I could find no sources to verify the price of the helicopter toy. Now, let's take a look at a modern replica of the toy. This is a modern reproduction of the toy helicopter the Wright brothers' father bought for them. This is the thing that sparked it all. The instructions say to wind this about 50 times to begin with, and it should fly to a height of about 30 feet. I did another video which shows how to assemble this, because you do have to assemble the thing. The original one, I assume, would have probably been made out of balsa wood or some light wood, not plastic like this one. And let's turn this about 50 times. That's 20. I'm going to step back so I can release this thing and you can see it. All right. And there it went. I'm going to step back a little more. This toy has become known as the Wright brothers' bat because Orville and Wilbur said that it reminded them of a bat flying in the air. You can still buy these online. I bought this one off Amazon. Let's watch it. Now I'm going to try to launch it with one hand while I'm holding the camera with the other. Let's see how this goes.